Hello and welcome to Hello everybody. My name is Aiden Dowling and I'm very happy to be here with you all today. And welcome to Transgender and Non-Binary Social Influencer Marketing in 2020. Just happy to be here and happy to provide value to you. If you would like to talk to me after, please save all your questions. We'll be doing a Q&A at the end here, and I'm happy to go over any questions or anything that you would like to dive into more. So let's jump into this. So the 5 things you should know about me. Why should you listen to me, right? Like, what am I here to do? So I'm here because I am actually a full-time social media influencer myself, and I'm also a social media consultant. So I've been on YouTube for the last 10 years. I've got a TikTok and a Twitter and all of that, but Instagram is definitely my home base. I have 196,000 followers on Instagram. I've also worked with companies like Axe. I worked with Axe this last year, consulting and influencing for them. Also Dollar Shave Club, Bud Light, a bunch of great companies that really do their best to learn about the transgender and non-binary community so that they can then market and provide value to that community as well. I got my claim to fame as being the first transgender man on the cover of Men's Health magazine in 2015, which also landed me on the Ellen DeGeneres show twice. So that was really, really awesome. And then I am also the co-founder and board president of my nonprofit, pointofpride.org. We are a grassroots nonprofit, and we've raised over $250,000 in funding, and that is just in one of our programs. We have 5 different programs. We've raised a lot more money than that, but I'm just really proud of the $250,000 to directly into the hands of surgeons so trans people can get the gender-affirming surgeries that they need to live a more authentic life. So I'm really happy to be here with you all today, and I really think this is going to be of value to you. So here we go. The first thing I want to start with is just the basics. So I know that we have a range of people here, right? We have people who know it all, who get all the lingo, who are in it, right? And then we have people who don't know all the lingo, they don't know all the terminology, and they don't know. And that's totally fine. So for the people who do know, you might hear some reiterations. For the people who don't know, that's fine. Just listen, hear, take in, write notes. And I also want to say before we jump into the terms is that there's so much fluidity in the trans community that we can't really, like I'm going to give you the basics, the 101 version, the intro, the class you got to take before you can get the class, the prerequisite, right? So that's what we're going to talk about here. So you're probably going to hear other terminology used within the trans and non-binary community, but these are the top ones right here. So we're going to start with my personal identity. I identify as a transgender man or a trans man, or also known as trans male. And trans men are men. We are assigned female at birth, but male is how we identify. Some other ways, other things you might see around is FTM, that's an acronym for female to male. So is the F2M, that's also another acronym for female to male. And also transmasculine. You'll hear some people use the word transmasculine also within this kind of umbrella terminology. Then we jump into non-binary. So non-binary or gender fluid are probably the more common terms that you're going to hear in this community. Non-binary individuals identify as having 2 or more genders, no gender, or they move between the genders. So some other terms you might hear is androgynous, agender, GNC, which stands for gender non-conforming. Again, there's going to be a lot of other terminologies, but if you go in with this basic understanding of trans men non-binary and trans women, you're going to have a much easier way of assimilating into the conversation and really touching the audience you're trying to reach. Trans women or trans female. So trans women are women who are assigned male at birth but are female identified. So you might also hear words like trans femme, and then we go back to those acronyms, M to F, or literally MTF, right? So male to female, male to female. So those are the basic terminologies. Real cut and dry. Again, this is kind of the 101 version. But you should feel confident in these. Remember that people can also be fluid, so there could be different identities identifying within all of these identities. So it's kind of a cool thing about the trans community is we're very open. We really let you identify how you want to identify, which is new, I think, for a lot of people. So first, when you're marketing to us, right, first you need to know who we are. So now you know who we are. Now you got to know about our values. What do we care about? We care about investing in our future. That is the number one thing trans people care about, is seeing our future and being able to think about what we're going to be doing in the future. So as an LGBT community, LGB, we got a lot to fight for. Trans people, we got a lot to fight for too. And what I want to talk about in this slide is not to downgrade or dismiss the fight that LGB communities have, but instead to let this moment in time be a highlight of the transgender struggles and the things that trans and non-binary people fight for every day. So our lives have been under attack. And I think if you are watching this and you are here in the United States, or honestly, over the entire world, you will see that trans people have been attacked over and over and over, especially in 2020. 2020 has been the year of attacking trans people. So just another reason to have the support of your company, of companies, of brands, just helps bring the trans community to a higher respected level in the whole world, to be completely honest. So what do we value? We trust companies that value our lives, like not in a figurative way, but in a literal way. Black trans women are being murdered every single year. 2020 was the highest cases in the United States alone. So we are literally fighting for our lives. We're fighting for protections, legal protections. We're fighting for health care, being able to be seen by doctors in emergency situations, right? We're fighting for our expression, our gender expression. We're fighting to build a family. We're fighting to be able to see our future, to build a family, whether that's having family or adoption. We are fighting to also keep our families because a lot of us are displaced due to coming out as transgender. One thing to remember also is that all trans, we're all different, right? So companies need to think broadly when it comes to their product and who in the transgender community they're selling to. So remember, we're going to actually get a little bit more into this later. Actually, let's just jump right to here because I think it's going to explain it better. What we look for, right? So key takeaways when speaking to the trans community, which brings us back to this one, right? This expanding gender, right? So when I talk about all trans is all different, I mean, if you are a men's body wash, okay, you have to really think when you're advertising and marketing to the transgender and non-binary community, who are you actually advertising to? Because you're not just advertising to men, because in the trans community, the people who would use a men's body wash is way more than just male identified people like myself. So you've got male identified people like myself, you've got trans masculine non-binary people who are non-binary identified, but they prefer to dress and showcase a more trans masculine, a more male outward appearance. And then you've got non-binary or gender fluid people who like to go back and forth, people who will use a men's product, then use a woman's product, and go back and forth simultaneously. So coming back to here, and what we're looking for is we're looking for companies to expand the concept of gender. We don't just want to see a men's body wash advertised to stereotypical looking men. Now, we want to see that because people like myself in the trans community want to be able to see our reflection of ourselves. But even I want to see other identities, other expressions of that identity within that advertising. We also are super sensitive on language. You may already know that. But one thing to remember when it comes to language is that you might not always get it right. And so language is always changing, right? We see that in the LGBT community too. It's changed over the decades. Well, in the trans community, we kind of go things at a different pace. We like to speed it up. So our language is changing drastically. When I first came out in 2009, transsexual was a really common term. Then transgender was a really common term, and transsexual was not something you used. Now more people are identifying as transsexual. So we have this fluidness of our language. But the number one thing you can think about when marketing to trans and non-binary people, and you're thinking about language, is to remember that it's about the intention. Okay, it's about the intention. That is what it matters. So even if you don't necessarily do it right, the intention is always going to be there. And that also leads us to speaking up. Speak up. If you mess up, say it. Say you messed up, right? If you so that kind of comes to the marketing. But the other aspect of speaking up is this concept that we need more companies, more brands to back us up and to speak up for us, because our voices are not being heard at the high level of some of the brands and companies that are looking to market to us, right? And so we need y'all to really be a voice for us. Speak up when it's necessary, you know? It's not about calling people out, but it's about calling people in, saying, hey, we're a company that really respects you and we want to hear from you. And we don't think that these things are right. We think you should be treated with respect and care. That's what we want to hear, right? And then the other thing we want to see is we want you to hire us. We don't just want you to necessarily advertise to us, but we want to literally see that within your company, you have trans and non-binary representation. We don't want you to slap a trans flag like everyone does for Pride Month, where you slap a rainbow flag on everything. We want you to truly 100, 24/7, 365 be supporting us. And by hiring us and showing the stories of the trans and non-binary people that work at your company is going to really be a great way to kind of get right into us, to the sense of wow, they actually they practice what they preach type of thing. Now you know who we are, you know what we care about. Now you got to know how to get us to actually trust you, so to then purchase your product. And that is where social comes into play so much, just so much. The transgender explosion, I want to talk a little bit about this. The transgender community, we grew up on social media. I mean, literally, I personally, and many other trans people, literally grew up on social media. Now, yes, non-trans and LGBT people grew up on social media as well. But the great barrier of information for transgender people was knocked down when Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, especially with Tumblr, when Tumblr was still popping, right? We literally learned about who we are, found our language through social media. I honestly, if we didn't have social media, I don't know if I would have found my trans identity, because I had never been exposed to people and I had never heard or seen trans men being their full selves, right? Actually showing up. So another quick little thing I want to say about just social media transness is kind of this queer theory. So queer is an identity that does not equal transgender. If you're queer, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're trans. But very often, if you are transgender, you identify as queer. So they're not always found together, but very often, if you're a transgender, you identify as queer also. So just keep that in mind. But you can't assume that a queer person is trans. So trans people also identify as heterosexual, bisexual, pansexual, straight, gay, lesbian. We identify as it all, but a majority of us will choose to use languages like queer instead of just saying, anything else. we get help from our friends. So another reason why social media is so important is that transgender individuals, we share information. That is how we get our information. End of story. There's not enough books, TV, movies, media in general for trans people. So we literally go to each other and we talk to one another to learn about our surgeons, our doctors, which companies to use, which celebrities are awesome and which ones suck, which influencers like us and which ones you shouldn't be following. We literally share all of that information. And not only do we just share information, we actually get all of our how-tos from social media like Instagram, YouTube, Reddit. What I mean by that is literally like how to wear a binder, how to wear a gaff, how to get your voice to, be higher or lower, how to come out to your parents, how to come out to your professor. Literally, these are all things that we share. We share online through social media. That is our number one way of communicating to one another, and the number one way that we know how to go about our transition, what to do, how to express ourselves, and how to stand up for ourselves. Which is why it's so important to have positive influencers bringing positive outcomes, okay? So often the trans community, we're knocked down all of the time. We are at the bottom of the pyramid here, right? We are kind of, yeah. So what do we need to do? Like, we need influencers who are positive, okay? So besides the normal know-hows of picking an influencer that fits with your brand, we all know about that stuff. You need an influencer who supports and engages with the general transgender community. Because the community, the trans community, as I said earlier in this earlier slide, right, is that we get help from our friends. So we hear what brands to use from each other. So the community purchases from people they learn from. That's the biggest way we purchase, is if we heard someone else use that binder, get that product, get that, shaving cream, get that shirt, get those shoes, whatever that food, whatever the product is, we hear from each other. That's literally how we learn from one another. So how do you pick a winning influencer? How do you pick somebody who's going to be able to tap into the trans community and also, as we all know, like, support our brand, be with our brand, and fall in line in a very authentic way with our brand? So we need somebody who's going to be inclusive of identities. Why? I would say this is probably the most important thing. Why? Because cancel culture is really, really, really real. And you need somebody who's going to be open to not just talking to and supporting their, like, I don't just talk to transgender men. I talk to transgender men, I talk to non-binary people, I talk to trans women, right? I talk to cis people, I talk to everybody. And I'm very inclusive of other people who identify as male but don't look like me, right? So we need to be really inclusive identities. We don't want, as a trans person who is male, right? Like, if I saw another guy who looked just like me, but talking trash about, like, non-binary people, I'm not going to follow them. Like, I'm not interested in that, right? That kind of piggybacks off of support other communities, not just the trans community, right? You need to find an influencer who is willing to speak up, which is another one out there, being outspoken about the things that matter to them. Another thing in here is intersectionality. So being intersectional, the trans community is one of the most intersectional communities out there, period. We are so diverse. We are so, we cross all the boxes, everything, right? Like, we are all of them all together. And so we need to be outspoken about what we love, who we support, right? And we also need to support other communities. We need to be intersectional. We need to, I need to also talk about Black trans women. They need to not be afraid of those things. You need to really find someone who is outspoken in a way that is confident and secure, but also not pushy and not pushing people away and not being not inclusive. You also need somebody who's positive. So the trans community has enough negativity out there from the hate that comes into us, from the politics that get thrown onto us, right? So we need somebody who's positive. We like to follow positive people. We like to be able to look at our influencers and look at the people around us and say, yeah, like they're supportive. They're so like loving. They're going to support me no matter who I am. Because the other thing in the trans community is sometimes we tend to be fluid. Like we might identify as transgender man, then we might start to say, you know what, actually, I feel like I'm more non-binary, or we might identify as non-binary and then decide, and then like, you know, have realizations that actually, you know what, I'm more trans femme, I'm a trans woman, right? So we need somebody who's not just going to be like, well, if you don't fit this category, then you're out, right? Someone who's going to talk to the trans community as a whole. And you need somebody who comments back, someone who is engaging. That is what I have seen, and the influencers I've worked with and are friends with as well. The best ones who have the highest following, who have the best engagement, who have the people who buy the products from them, or, you know, like the sponsored products and stuff, and the brands that they work with are positive people who comment back. People who we want to have a conversation with you, right? Like we really, really want engagement. That is the best influencers out there. Go ahead, go look, like scroll on your phone. The best transgender, non-binary influencers out there are the ones who are commenting back, who are engaging with the community, because that's what we need. We need support, and that's what we want to see in the influencers and the brands and companies that we decide to work with. So that's kind of the 101. I want to thank everybody for coming. Again, if you have any questions, so happy to answer them in just a few minutes. If you want to follow me and check out all of my stuff, you can follow me on Instagram at AllianceSphere. You can reach out to me through my email at bookAidenDowling@gmail.com. And if you just want to like see the brands I've worked with, some of the content that I've created, you can go to aidendowling.com and check it out there. Otherwise, I'm just so happy and excited for you to take this information back to your company, back to your brand, maybe it's your brand, and really be able to use this, because the trans community is a community that needs to be marketed to, because we deserve it. Because we are just as equal as our cisgender, our lesbian, our gay counterparts. And we are one of the most biggest rising of the LGBTQ community. Trans, queer, I mean, we're starting to really push through. I believe it's 1 in every 5 high schooler identifies outside of the binary of male or female. I mean, that's a lot. So we're out here. We're really proud to be out here. And we want to see companies like yours loving and supporting us. And we want to love and support you back by buying your products and talking about your services. Thanks, everyone.